Hello, everyone. My name is Bettina Duval, and I am the current UC Berkeley Foundation Board Chair. I also am on the Vice Chair of the Goldman School of Public Policy at Berkeley, and I'm a founder of a political action committee called Friends of the University of California. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today to the second of the speaker series here at the new UC Center, which is just absolutely beautiful. It's a distinct honor to be here today and to have the opportunity to introduce our esteemed moderator and our keynote speaker. But before I begin, I want to extend a big thank you to the UC Center here and its dedicated staff for graciously hosting all of us. So thank you very much where you all may be. Today's discussion offers us a glimpse into the future of California and the leaders guiding our state forward. Leading our conversation is the remarkable Monica Lozano. She's the previous publisher and CEO of La Opinión, the largest Spanish-language newspaper in the United States, and also a former regent. Monica is a distinguished leader whose contributions to journalism, business, and public service have left an indelible mark on California and beyond. Thank you, Monica. And of course, we have the honor of welcoming our keynote guest, none other than Pro Tem Emeritus Speaker Toni Atkins. Senator Atkins is a true trailblazer in California politics, dedicating over 20 years and counting to public service. As an aside, I met Toni probably 20 years ago when she was on the San Diego City Council. Senator Atkins has made history as the first woman and LGBTQ official to hold the positions of both Speaker of the Assembly and Senate President pro tempore. Really impressive, Toni. With her trailblazing leadership and unwavering commitment to progress, Senator Atkins continues to pave the way for a brighter future here in California. Without any further delay, I'm going to hand it off to our moderator, Monica, to get us started on today's event. And thank you again for all being here.
Great. Thank you, Bettina, and welcome everybody. And I hope those of you who are behind this pillar are able to see at least our distinguished speaker, Senate Pro Tem Emeritus Toni Atkins. It really is a privilege to be with you today and to be in this beautiful facility. I want to welcome you to this conversation. The format is we'll spend about 30 minutes, me in conversation with the speaker, the Senate Pro Tem Emeritus, Senator Atkins. And then we're going to take some questions from students, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So if you have questions, go ahead and prepare them. And before we get started, I'm not sure they're here, but I did want to recognize that we should be joined by Senator Roger Nilo of the 6th District. And two of the big supporters of UC, Joanne Cosberg and Bill Sayart, who I'm not sure are here, but I saw that Joanne has a room named after her.
As Senator Nilo.
There's Senator Nilo, just arriving. Great. So I want to kick it off. And Senator Atkins, given that we're at a UC facility and you and I had an opportunity to serve as regents for the University of California together for many years when you were in your role as speaker. You've talked often in terms of your own background and what contributed to your success, the role that going to college played. And over the many years that you've been in the legislature, you've seen any number of transformations of public higher education in California. And I'm wondering if you can reflect on what you see as having been successful during your legislative career, and then what are the persistent challenges, whether it be affordability or access, quality, the issues that we still need to grapple with in public higher ed?
All of the above. One thing I would say, I want to really acknowledge Monica. If you don't have her bio in front of you, you should Google it. She's an incredible trailblazer in her own right in so many ways, and it was a joy to serve with you as a regent, me in my role as speaker, when we were able to do that. So thank you. And Bettina, thank you for being here to introduce both of us. I love our history together and appreciate it. And I got to acknowledge the senator just walked in, my colleague. I think this is your district, is it not?
No,
A little ways up.
I
But
figure if you can miss your caucus lunch, I can miss my caucus.
There you go.
well, that, Senator, that's one of the perks of having been the pro tem. I do not have to go to caucus because I sort of had a double dose of those caucuses as leader. But thank you. It's good to see you. And I want to quickly acknowledge there's a number of folks in the room that I know quite well. And there's a number of my incredible former staff members who served with me either as assembly member, speaker, senator, or pro tem. And I just want to say thank you. I wouldn't be where I am without the incredible work of these folks. So I want to thank you for being here. You know, Monica, and please call me Toni. Otherwise, it's a long title, and people, people confuse me and call me Speaker Pro Tem, which is actually a combination of two jobs.
Yes.
So Toni seems a lot easier.
Thanks.
College was a game changer for me. Of course, I grew up in Southwest Virginia, a very rural community, very conservative in Southwest Virginia. I always say I'm from Southwest Virginia because otherwise people think I'm from Northern Virginia. It's very different. I grew up in a very conservative area. My family, my dad was a lead miner and a coal miner. My mom was a garment worker or a seamstress. And I grew up in a house with no running water. We had to carry water from a spring. We had an outhouse, which is why today my favorite room in the house will always be the bathroom. But I say that because it really informs how important it was for me to go to college. And I was an incredibly good student all the way through high school because for me, my parents were not college educated. My dad was a World War II vet. He got his GED, served in World War II, stationed in a little sleepy town called San Diego, which is where I came to be some 50 years later. My mom had a high school diploma, but they were lifelong learners. They read. They instilled in me a love of reading. We always had a library card. But I was the first in my family to go to college and to graduate. I had two brothers who went to college but ended up one going to Vietnam, a little bit older than me, and the other joining the Army. So I was the first to graduate. And I worked really hard to get there. And I lived in Virginia, very homogenous community. It was where I grew up in Virginia, it was African American and white. Catholic was very exotic. I used to go to Catholic church for fun because it was such an interesting service compared to Pentecostal holiness churches. So very homogenous. But I managed to get to college. I went to a liberal arts school in Southwest Virginia, and I wouldn't have been able to go. We talk about all of the issues today. My lived experience informs the policy work that I do today. So I was able to go to college at even though it was a lot of money and it took me 10 years to pay back the loans, I got scholarships, I got grants, Pell Grant, all of those things, and I did college work study. I had 3 jobs. But I got to go to college, and I got a traditional 4-year liberal arts education and a degree. And then, of course, I didn't know what I was going to do with that. But that informs, I think, the work that I do around education. Clearly, I work on affordable housing, health care. I never had health care growing up. So all of those things really inform the policy work that I do. But I will tell you, were it not for a good college education, and frankly, for school counselors and the librarian, who was so important to me, those things we don't have in K through 12 across the board here in California today. And those are aspirational things. So when we look at education funding, there's a number of things that I feel proud to have been able to do. Maybe that'll be a question, but maybe I'll stop there because there are quite a number of things related to education in California that I've been able to work on myself or to lead an assembly or senate in terms of crafting that agenda for how to provide more and support not only higher education, but K through 12.
Well, why don't we go there then? Because I do want the audience to understand what you were able to accomplish, what were some of the policy wins, and what still needs to be done in order to ensure that our systems of public higher education in particular, because we're at UC, can continue to provide the quality education, the world-class quality education that California is known for?
Well, I think because we're at UC, I'm going to use that as an example. I think in the last year we've increased, one of our big goals has been to increase access for California students. Some of our biggest discussions when you and I were on the Board of Regents to increase the number of slots for Californians and to make it more affordable. We increased by, I think, 4,000 slots. Not an easy thing to do. A number of things that we were able to do. Clearly, I was one of the co-authors of the legislation that Gil Cedillo did to support Dreamers. You heard me talk about Virginia being pretty homogenous where I grew up. California is so not. One of the most amazing things in moving to California was to see the incredible diversity in this state. And that is one of our best assets, our most wonderful attributes in California, but it's also a huge challenge in terms of being able to provide the kinds of services. And if you're a first-generation college kid like I was, and I went to a very small private liberal arts school, we had 1,000 students, think about the support that we need to provide students, particularly first-generation students, when they get to those large campuses. I'm really fortunate in San Diego. I represent a CSU, a UC San Diego, and a very robust community college. So I live in a community with an abundance of opportunity. But in order to make that real on the ground, you've got to really look at the services you provide, and you've got to make it affordable. One of the greatest things, this was done under the former speaker, John Perez, who you know from serving as also a UC regent, was the Middle Class Scholarship Program, something we still invest in today. And look, I am mindful that as we sit here today, there was the May revise that really has impacted, and we are still wading through the governor's proposal on the May revise to see all of the potential deferrals, clawbacks, cuts, if you will, and how we're going to continue those programs. But middle class scholarship was probably one of the best, in addition to increasing Cal Grants. And so those kinds of things, in addition to supporting student success when they're on campuses, those kinds of things. And then, of course, housing has become a huge issue. And to put resources towards UC's being able to build. They're doing a lot of it at UC San Diego. I'll use that because that's my home turf. But I know it's happening all up and down the state. So that money that we were able to put towards housing has been pretty important. And debt-free college for foster youth. I mean, we are trying really to, a word we hear a lot these days, but it is meaningful, is equity. It's not just about equal access, it's about equity. And so we have to grapple with all of those issues as we look at budgets.
I think it's so important what you just said, because for so many years, it really was about access and making sure there was room for Californians. And now it is about providing the kinds of supports that allow students to thrive and to make their way through college and into graduation, and certainly affordability and dealing with the aspects of affordability, as you mentioned, are so important. Yeah. I want to ask you, and then we're going to move on, but we talk a lot about Californians' role in the world economy and our global competitiveness, and yes to all of that. And I'd like for you, if you could, to just talk a little bit about the role that higher education plays in ensuring that California continues to be competitive and that we're meeting the labor market needs, especially as we transition to a knowledge-based and creative economy.
Well, I mean, I think it's crucial, and it's clear that a skilled, educated workforce is critical for our economy in California. And I don't think anyone understands that more than probably UC. UC, CSU, very different animals, different kinds of missions and focuses, but both educating young people. And whether you're talking UC or CSU, both agree that if we are not educating our young folks and finding a way to keep them here, the economy in California is going to suffer. I think the role that UC plays that I think is very different is research and innovation. UC is known for research and innovation, and you put money towards that. And there's so many examples of that. And I will just say, it's changing. When I was a college student, it was, you got what was sort of like a traditional 4-year academic degree. And if you got liberal arts in there, it was good. But today, there's so many divergent paths, whether it is, a focus on STEM and science and math, whether it is a focus on labor. A great example, UC has, I think it's 8 labor centers. Obviously, UCLA was one of the first. Berkeley has one. A number of the schools do. San Diego just kicked open. And what's important about that is we talk a lot about labor in this state and the role that various labor organizations plays, but have we done the research and the data to back it up? And so that's an area where I think UC saw research needed. And of course, there's others. There's laboratories, science, innovation, technology. And UC has played a major role in helping to figure out what the workforce looks like going forward, and to give recommendations and data points on how we need to shift our way of thinking to accommodate the types of skilled and educated workers we need, whatever that path.
Toni, Senator Atkins, I want to shift and talk a little bit about your time in the legislature. And when I appreciate your introduction of me and certainly my career, but I can't think of very few people who have been as effective as you have been, starting off in city government, becoming mayor of San Diego for a period of time, moving into the assembly, becoming speaker of the assembly, moving into the Senate, becoming pro tem. And just the arc of your legislative career is extraordinary. And you're known for so many issues, whether it's women's reproductive rights or health care or the earned income tax credit, affordability and housing. But when you think about the urgent, pressing issues facing California today, is there one that you would prioritize over others? Like, how do we set priority? And you mentioned the May revise, because budgets are a reflection of priorities as well. So where do we need to focus?
Well, I think we need to be intentional about everything that we do. And I think we need to, all the money in the world doesn't necessarily translate into the best programs, the best outcomes, unless, and I'm looking at the vice chair of budget over here, Senator Nilo. Money has to be used efficiently, effectively, and with intention. And so when you talk about priorities, the press asks me this all the time. It is so hard to give one priority because it's all important and it's all interwoven. I mean, affordable housing is critical right now. We can talk about the role that education plays in our economy moving forward, innovation. But if people can't afford to live here, young people are not going to stay, and that is a problem. So, I will tell you this, when I talk to community groups up and down the state in my own community for 30 years, one thing that does resonate, and this will make you happy, always people want to talk about the support that the legislature gives to education. Whether it's K through 12, higher education gets a lot of discussion, childcare, but then affordable housing and the cost of living. And we can list the long list of challenges that California has. Housing, the cost of living, water, and depending upon where you live in the state, you look at that from a different lens and perspective. Energy is going to become a big issue. As we have all of these climate goals, we have to have the energy to support the EVs. So I can tell you, uppermost in my mind right now is cost of living for people. Uppermost in my mind is continuing to be focused on providing housing and how we do that. And of course, we've got to continue to stay focused on education because it is topmost in people's minds all the time. And I'm not just saying that because I'm sitting in front of you. If you were to go to a planning committee in North Park in San Diego, I guarantee you every time someone asks a question about it. So these are all really important things. And, a governor, for example, doesn't get to just tell you what all the priorities are. It's going to be what shows up on his or her desk at 4 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon that you didn't see coming. Kind of like a pandemic, right? So I know what the challenges are in this state. I know what people are concerned about, but I think overriding everything right now in the minds of regular, everyday Californians is cost of living. And I'm just going to say this. The effectiveness, I grew up in Southwest Virginia. It was conservative. I served on the San Diego City Council. My mentor, Chris Kehoe, was the first open LGBTQ person to serve. The council was predominantly Republican then. When I got on the council, it was 50-50 and went back and forth over the 8 years I was there. You have got to learn to work across the aisle. I will say this. I know that California is predominantly a Democratic state by the numbers of people in the legislature. But you know what? People in community up and down the state need to be represented. They need to be able to have their voices heard. Most of the issues we discuss are issues of regular, everyday Californians, be they declined estates, Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians. And so I think effectiveness is when you learn to hear people and what their concerns are and figure out how to make sure everybody's got a seat at the table to some degree so that you're hearing from all Californians. And so I think I give a lot of credit to my colleagues and to the staff that have helped me be effective and bring stakeholders together.
Well, I appreciate that because that's exactly where I wanted to go with my next line of questioning, which is your effectiveness. You've been called a pragmatist. You do reach across the aisle. You bring the right people to the table, and we don't see enough of that in many legislative bodies across the country, frankly. And so when I think about what are the critical contributors to your success, maybe especially because we've got students who are interested in public policy and maybe one day actually running for elected office, just expand on that. What are the qualities that make you most effective? Not the need to reach across the aisle, but your personal qualities that have allowed you to be successful and what you've seen in others.
Well, I think I always remember I was someone who didn't have a voice. I grew up thinking the world was not about me. I grew up in poverty. We couldn't seem to work our way out of poverty despite how hardworking my parents were. And I really didn't think society was about me. And it took, I had a great education, good mentors in college that told me, you don't want to be a victim. Nothing feels worse than being the victim. I wanted to, I wanted to be able to be part of something bigger than myself. And, I grew up in those communities where the voices were mostly conservative. And yet here I am. I came out as a lesbian at age 17. So I think, just realizing people are coming from where they come from. We all have stories, and our stories matter in so much as how we connect with each other. We may be very different on the outside, or it may seem like we're different. But when we get and drill down, I think we find we have more in common than not. You've heard that as a cliche before, but it's really true. And I think more than anything, I love hearing people's stories. I love listening to what concerns are because I'm pretty sure I've heard someone else say the same thing. And that's how you really bring the threads together. And I think it's really important that we do that. I don't think people like divisiveness. Most people do not like drama and divisiveness. We're busy trying to live our lives. We want to make sure our families are taken care of. We want to have a good quality of life, a decent place to live, good schools for our kids, and we want to make a decent living in order to do those things. So I think the more we ratchet it down, the better. And I also think public service is great. I've been, specifically when you campaign, you're often called a politician. I've always seen myself as a public servant. I love it. I love constituent services more than anything else. So I think you'll love it. When I was a staff member to a city council member, I loved the job more than anything. And it gave me the ability to actually contribute and make a difference and bring in those stories of people like me growing up so that they were heard. And I think there's nothing like public service. And there's such great opportunities today that didn't exist when I was a young person. I mean, I'm 61. And I didn't have the opportunity to apply for a fellows program or any of these internship programs. And by the way, the state, we now pay internship programs, as we should. I would have never been able to do that and work free of charge because I was too poor. I had to figure out how I was going to live. So it took me longer to find the way. So I encourage you. I've had some incredible fellows, who've done some of my toughest bills. So I encourage you. And I see Jessica here, who also worked for me and is now here at UC, I believe.
Great. So thank you. And I hope you heard the call, because we actually need really great people in elected office and doing public servant work. Just one last question in this area, and you mentioned affordability and the cost of living in California is, you think, the top priority. When you think of your achievements, is there one piece of legislation that is stamped Toni Atkins that you're most proud of?
Well, I'm going to have to say more than one. I'm a twin, so I always do in groups of. You mentioned the earned income tax credit, huge. For poor families, it makes a difference to have a state earned income tax credit to go along with the federal. Can bring you anywhere from a couple $100s to thousands of dollars if you add in the child tax credit. I mean, ways to put real money in the pockets of struggling Californians. So, and we expanded that year over year. Obviously, the money for affordable housing, the transfer fee that I did that helped bring about $250 million annually for low-income, affordable, subsidized housing. Clearly, some of the stuff I've done on LGBTQ, gender recognition, really important. And of course, SCA 10 that led to Proposition 1 that enshrined abortion and contraception into our Constitution. But, and then packages of housing bills. I came here to work on housing in 2010. I was elected, and nobody paid attention to housing in 2011. I kept saying we're going to have a problem. I knew it. And when the press finally kind of highlighted it as a crisis, people finally started to really get engaged in housing policy. But earned income tax credit, definitely. And of course, being part of, while I said John Perez actually started this, the middle class scholarship, really important.
Right. So I wanted to actually turn to housing and affordability. And there was a story that came out in the paper just the other day about how California's population has been shrinking. And the number one contributor to population loss, in addition to declines in immigration and death, et cetera, is precisely the cost of living in California. People just find it unaffordable. And no silver bullet, it's not easy. It may not be a question of money. It could be any number of things. But when you think about what's the solution set, what are the things that need to be done, and over what period of time do you think to actually tackle the issue of housing stock and affordability?
Well, it took us 30 years to work our way into this dilemma. And, government, I will say, if there is a downside, it is government typically responds to crisis. We don't always look ahead and try to plan effectively for what needs to happen because there's so many demands on the resources, right? Which you're going to see play out very seriously over the coming days related to the budget and the May revise. But, we have in the last, started under Governor Brown, and up to now, we have started to really address the issues on creating stock of housing. 20 years ago, the BIA, the Building Industry Association, told me it's red tape and regulation. The affordable housing folks said it's resources and money. And finally, one day in the room with both of them, I said, it's both of those things. It's all of those things. So we started to address some of the streamlining. SB 7 was a bill that helped further streamline it, followed up on a AB 900, which was trying to really cut the regulatory process for big projects, and then we got it down to smaller and smaller projects. Certainly all of the money. And you said magic bullet. We got to come up with some good analogies.
Yeah, that's
Democrats
right.
don't like
We don't like that.
magic bullets.
No.
But it's a perfect phrase.
No metaphors, no
Yeah,
metaphors.
you know,
Okay.
I'm from Southwest Virginia. I can give you a few that I really am not going to say.
Is there running water involved or
No, probably animals. Also not touchable. But I would say redevelopment was a magic bullet, and we lost redevelopment, which was money towards affordable housing and home ownership. So we've spent the last decade working on regulation around housing, putting money into housing. Last 2 years ago, I put in the framework in the budget process for the California Dream for All. We had $500 million last year. In 11 days, $300 million went out to help on down payment assistance for home ownership. Home ownership is critically important for many of us marginalized communities, mine being poor, but communities of color, to be able to create intergenerational wealth, something my family never had. I'm the first homeowner in my family. So all of the policies we put in place and the resources, we have to be intentional and stay focused. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of discussion about to put everything on the table. Labor costs are high in our state. We focus a lot on making sure that the people who build our homes are able to afford to buy our homes. That translates into labor cost. The cost of building materials is up. It is more difficult in California to build. But what's also difficult is communities' reactions to things like density. And I think you're seeing what I am calling a very generational shift of folks my age who, I did SB 9, which was a bill that did a duplex lot split. I know, don't let your eyes glaze over. It's good stuff, housing policy, that would allow for a lot split. And in California, the property has to be a certain size before you can divide it and then create a duplex and a duplex. That's 4 units total, not more. And but here's the top line associated with SB 9: ended single-family zoning in California. Right. Well, that is big in the minds of people. The actual implementation of that is so minor compared to things like multifamily housing, ADU, accessory dwelling unit legislation. So, there's a generational shift by those who really like single-family zones, and there's going to be still a lot of single-family zones in existence, whether by nature of the law saying no single-family zoning, it'll still be there. But younger folks are willing to look at this because they have a different mindset, and they want to be able to own a small condo, or they want to be able to own. And so, and plus lots of younger folks want less space, not more, and want to be able to be mobile and move. And so I think you're going to continue to see a generational shift. But housing, we have done a lot, but we have to stay the course because implementation of housing policy takes time and is more complicated.
So last question, and then I'm going to take some questions from students and the audience. But so you mentioned labor costs and intergenerational wealth. And as we think about California, too often it becomes stories of haves and have-nots. And we have some of the most robust industries, whether it's technology and agriculture, aerospace, et cetera. But very often it feels that the economic growth is uneven. And so as you think about in your leadership role, building for an inclusive economy, what are the ways in which we can guarantee that all people benefit from the riches of the state?
Well, and that you've hit upon the absolute crux of the dynamic and discussion in the legislature every day. We only have so much in terms of resources. How do we make a commitment to child care slots and ability for working Californians to be able to afford child care? And who does it impact mostly? Still women who want to be in the workforce and lose out on income because you're away from the job market for a while and you have to come back and make up. Child care slots versus how do we support business? Government subsidizes lots of things. We subsidize your mortgage credit deduction on your home if you own a home, which is the other reason people should own a home, because then they get the benefit of that tax credit. But the dilemma and the discussion that we have every day in the legislature through the budget process is, what are the priorities? Because depending upon where you sit, you may prioritize housing, education, support for agriculture and farm worker programs, how you transition related to climate change and have more clean vehicles, greenhouse gas emissions, climate change, existential threat to our world. We prioritize that. It's always a balancing act between how we support, small business, the Silicon Valley businesses and research and development, R&D tax credits. All those things are the dilemma and the discussions we get into. And if we're good, we're listening to our communities and we're trying to piece it together. That's why, but what I will say in this crowd is always, for multiple reasons, again, I'm gonna harken back to what community members tell me. Education is critical. What economists tell us, that the economy is going to be fueled if you have an educated workforce. And that means whether you're getting a degree at UCCS, you're working through the community college system, or you go the apprenticeship route. You got to have a lot of math and know a lot of math to be an apprentice and a carpenter and a tradesperson. Am I right, Charles? Thank you. They've taught me well. So I would say it's always going to be up for discussion, and that's where you come in. You are all invested. You are all stakeholders, and you'll either play a role in this by stepping up and becoming a policymaker in one sense or another, or you're going to be consumers and voters and citizens and residents of California. So,
great, thank you. So I have 2 questions from students that were prepared and presented, but if you're in the audience, I would encourage you to ask your own questions. So Ashkan Jones from UC San Diego, are you here?
UC San Diego.
Yes.
In the house.
Deliberately picked UC San Diego.
Hi, Senator. Don't know if you remember, but last time I saw you was staff and council member Kent Lee. And shout out to Cole Reed, wherever he is back home.
Yep.
And my question was just about housing, as you know, a very big issue out here. And I was just wondering, since you're running for governor, if you're satisfied on your record of housing. As you mentioned, you passed SBs 9 and 10, one of which built 0 homes in San Diego, according to the San Diego Auditor's Office. The other couldn't get it through the San Diego City Council. So I was just wondering if you were satisfied with that record and what you would do differently as governor.
Thank you. Well, that's a good question. I'm going to quote that famous philosopher, Billy Joel. Only fools are satisfied. I'm never satisfied. Do I think that I've been part of doing some really good legislation? Absolutely. When I first got to Sacramento, there would have never been a discussion of by right housing. Governor Brown brought that up as an issue. Go look it up, by right housing. And we steadily moved in the direction of finally getting legislation done. As a city council member in an urban set of communities, the communities all around Balboa Park, North Park, all those areas there, I was a city council member that got more affordable housing built than any other council member. And we had redevelopment then. So we were able to use it for everything we could and also have a home ownership program. When we got to the state, I have to be honest, I was frustrated for about the first 4 years. Very frustrated. I couldn't get folks to hear me on some of the things I thought we needed to do. And now, we're tripping over ourselves with people who want to be affordable housing champions, from Buffy Wicks, Chris Ward, a number of people. Bob Witkowski did most of the work on ADUs, along with Phil Ting out of San Francisco. Scott Wiener has shadowed the world in terms of progressive, aggressive policies on housing. He has pushed the envelope. So I think there's a lot more that we can do, but I think we need to focus on the implementation on the ground at the local level. And you see a little bit of rub between state and local, because it is hard to be in local government. Your communities are at your doorstep every single day telling you, no, I do not want density in my neighborhood. They want it somewhere, just not in my neighborhood. I've been through that fight. I've sat through planning committees upon planning committees. So I'm not satisfied, but I think we have finally understood the challenge and the crisis. And I look forward, while this is my last year, and I probably have one more housing bill in the works right now, but I look forward to all these great people who are going to be here and continue to pick up the mantle and move forward on housing.
Can you describe the focus of this new housing bill, or not yet?
Well, no. Yeah. Well, I may have to. There's a court case. I may have to fix a little legislation, and I'm prepared to do so if necessary.
One last big bold move by Toni Atkins. So, Alice Malmberg from UC Davis, are you here, Alice?
Hi, good afternoon, Senator. My name is Alice Malmberg. I am a PhD candidate in political science at UC Davis, and I'm also a graduate student researcher here at the UC Center. And you briefly touched on this kind of throughout your talk, but I was curious how your non-traditional background, specifically in terms of coming from a working class background and also not a native Californian, among other things, has shaped your career in public service as well as your legislative priorities.
Well, thank you. I think I've sort of answered some of that. I mean, I really think by non-traditional, my lived experience that I bring to the table, having struggled growing up and knowing what those struggles were and how they impacted me and my family and others like me. I've met folks like that in California, all across the state, really trying to make it. And I do think California is an incredible place with a lot of opportunity, but we have to be really intentional. And I think having lived that experience of having to fight my way to get an education, having to look and work really hard to pay for decent housing, not having access to health care, all of those things inform the policy areas that I've worked on. And that is...
Can I follow up on that? And thank you for the question. I guess I was thinking about the other aspect of your lived experience, being married, the first lesbian to be speaker, and also Senate Pro Tem. John Bettis, of course, first gay Latino man who was also speaker. And the fact that you haven't brought it up, does that say something about where we are as a society? Does it say something about Toni Atkins?
Well, let's see. The papers couldn't help but show my spouse and I kissed each other after I became the speaker. They got that picture. I think they were waiting on it. But, I have to say, I feel like we were on the path to it not being an issue. And right now we are facing a serious backlash for members of the LGBTQ community, particularly our transgender siblings and community members. And I think that's so unfortunate. I think some of it is a reaction to the strides that we made. Mm-hmm. When my mentor, Chris Kehoe, ran for office, Bettina, you'll recall, she was the first in San Diego. Her name was lesbian candidate Christine Kehoe, the whole time. When I ran to replace her, and by the way, that seat has been LGBTQ on the city council since Chris was elected. It was Chris, me, Todd Gloria, Chris Ward, Stephen Whitburn. 30 years that seat has remained. But I think it's, so when I ran for office, they mentioned it once. I remember they mentioned it once in the paper. Atkins would be the second LGBTQ, and then they never mentioned it again. And I think it shouldn't matter. I think we are who we are. And I think the community is really, the LGBTQ, and it really needs to add a plus. The world is a very different place today for young folks. And I am really saddened to see the backlash. But it does matter. We bring every piece of who we are. Right. Each of you brings every piece of who you are, whether it's ethnic, whether it's class, whether it's gender, all of those things we bring to what we present and the work that we do, whatever that work is. And so Jennifer and I have been together for 23 years, married when the state allowed us to marry in 2008. And for a while, when then Prop 22 kicked in, Jennifer and I were members of an 18,000 protected class of folks until it was finally overturned by the Supreme Court. So it's a big part of who I am. But I would say all my life I tried to figure out what boxes I would put myself in. First and foremost, I think it would be growing up poor. Second, it would be as a woman, because I watched my mom work twice as hard. She had a job and then she came home. Try washing clothes when you have to carry water from a spring in those old washing machines that I don't know. She worked twice as hard. And then when I came out in Southwest Virginia as a lesbian with no role models around me, so I didn't have any groomers, by the way, not a one that I recall. So I just became who I was. So I bring every part of that to the job that I do, and I know that each of you do too.
I love that. I don't think about checking boxes and this notion of intersectionality, and we are a combination of so much, and it's what has made you such a great civil servant and public servant. Let's go to questions from the audience, and don't feel like if you're a student you can't ask a question. It's open to anybody in the audience now. And introduce yourself if you don't mind.
My name is Scott Anglem. I'm an executive fellow, a UCLA grad. I'm actually a constituent and a fan.
What community do you live in?
I'm from City Heights, and I live up here now. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful
I
community.
wonder, it's a contentious issue, but I wonder where you see the future of water in California.
Oh, my. Water. I got to be honest, I tried to avoid it when I was on the city council because it was just so difficult, but you can't avoid water in California. And it depends on where you live. San Diego is very different than Central Valley and obviously the Delta area. I will tell you, I did get excited about having to learn everything about water, Colorado River. It is, when I talked about whatever's on your desk at 4 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon is the critical issue, water is on that top list. Cost of living, water, energy. Those are the things that create the cost of living. And I'm gonna give a shout out. Not a lot of folks do this, but you don't hear it enough. California grows most of the food for this country, and in fact, other parts of the world. And I just want to say that water efficiency, many of the farmers have had to become efficient because they have to pay for water and they need water. This is something we all need to work on from north to south, coastal to Central Valley and far east. We are dependent upon a master plan that we all have to be invested in, and it's going to be different solutions in different parts of the state. San Diego doesn't have storage, but we are doing water reuse. We're through this process now, hopefully getting closer and closer. We have desal, and we have conserved quite a bit. But it's going to be different for Central Valley and storage further north. We finally are moving along on sites, which took only a decade. We funded that during 2014, the water bond. I forgot, I love the water bond. Another thing I worked really hard on. And we are finally moving forward on sites. It only took a decade. That's way too long to address an issue so critical to the state.
Thank you. Any other question? There's a hand up over here. I don't know who has the mic, and then we'll go to you next.
And we have time for one more question. This will be our last one.
We have a hand up right here and one over there, and I think we do.
That's it.
We've got to just, go ahead.
Go ahead.
We'll take two questions.
Hi, I'm Julie Nola from UC Davis.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Sure. I don't know if this is on. I'm Julie Nola from UC Davis. I've spent my career in 30 years in running capital projects. I'm also the daughter of farmers and a granddaughter of farmers in California. And so I've just seen an increase in regulation and policies that really have made the small farmer and building
overly complicated and expensive and all the things that we're trying not to do. And yet I realize how important policy is. So is there any change that you see where, I feel like people in legislature feel like they have to create policy and that's what they have to stand on. And yet it would be nice to see some of this overcomplication that happens vetted or somehow some of it rolled back because it's not really helping. It's making, now I see farmer after farmer in my family leaving farming because it's just not sustainable.
Yeah, we could do a whole session on this. I would say it's true, and part of it is related to the aggressive and forward-thinking goals that we set, and we make regulations related to those goals, and there's a cost to that. There's an impact and there's a cost. I'm spending a lot of time in rural communities and meeting with a lot of ag, and have for years. So it is hard, and I think part of it is this. Departments that regulate do not spend enough time talking to each other. And the best example I can give you, the California Energy Commission, CARB, and the CPUC, when it comes to regulations around reducing greenhouse gas emissions, something we all want to do. And at the same time, it's going to be a dilemma sooner than later because, number one, I mentioned water and energy. We don't actually have enough energy to serve all of the EVs that we aggressively are trying to put on the ground, nor do we have the makers of the big vehicles that need to carry ag and goods throughout the state. So, we don't voice this enough. A great silver lining, I think that, policymakers come from their perspective of who they represent. You've got a speaker and a pro tem, both from rural communities. And I think this is an opportunity to really make the most of their reflecting their voices of the people they represent a lot in ag and rural communities, which feel like they really have not had a very good voice in California. They've had some voice, so you're absolutely right. I'm hearing a lot about it. I think there was one more.
Do we have time? We'll take one, and then
I'll try to be quick.
We'll go for closing remarks. Nope, I think we're good still.
Sure. Hi, I'm Victoria Hasid. I'm actually chair of the Agricultural Labor Relations Board. And one question I had for you is you mentioned that you don't think most people don't want divisiveness. And I think one of the fears that I have as someone who respects public servants and loves public service is that the level of vitriol in our discourse really discourages some from seeking higher office. We're even seeing challenges recruiting election, poll workers. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how best to address that and continue to encourage people to have a career in public service and hopefully feel safer doing so.
Right. Well, I would just say it's worth it. I would do it again tomorrow. Do I look forward to being attacked? Do I look forward to, and you always walk into a room wondering what is going to come up and how you're going to respond. And I understand why people make a choice. I don't have kids, and that's a huge choice for people who want to go in service because it impacts your family. My spouse is up for it, probably more so than I am. But it is hard, but I would say at the end of the day, it's really worth it. I'm very concerned about poll workers. I think of that differently because they are the tip of the spear when it comes to democracy in action. And so I think it starts with us though. We all have a role to not make it worse. You don't always have to put yourself in danger, but occasionally make sure you're the one smiling at someone, and even if they're saying something you don't agree with, at least be civil. I think it all starts with us, and we build from there. And to those of you thinking of going into public policy, running for office, I urge you to still consider it. It's worth it. When I think about something I've gotten done that is so meaningful to so many people, including myself, I'd do it again every time.
Well, that's a perfect way to end today's session. I was going to ask you to share reflections for everyone in the audience. And I had the great privilege of actually sitting next to Senator Atkins when she was in the Assembly and was Speaker, and we served on the UC Board of Regents for many years together. And I always saw her brilliance in higher education and her deep thinking about the role that higher education plays in California. But what we saw today was the glimpse of true brilliance across so many issue areas, whether it's water and agriculture, housing policy, issues of inclusion across the state, and economic growth and vitality. And I just want to thank you for your so many years of leadership, for everything you've done for California. It was a sacrifice. Clearly, it was a sacrifice, but we gained because of what you've given. So thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you all.